Hi everyone, welcome to the week 2 of the reading group. So I'm recording this video to make life easy for everyone. This week we're looking at quality and equality in education. So last week we looked at some critical approaches. This week we are looking at quality and equality. So very quick, these are some 2 minutes. So this is the outline for the 2 minutes 2 minutes tips on academic writing, the week 2 outline, what are our guiding questions, and what are we reading this week. Um, so always read the abstract first, like that's the main thing, and then from the abstract, like tease out the key information, aims and objective, main research problem, methods, results and findings, and key conclusion. Identify the keywords. This makes also your life easy. And ask yourself 4 questions in your head to crystallize your understanding. First one is, why did the author write this paper? What did the author do? What did the author find? And what does the finding mean? If you have, each time you approach a paper and you have these 4 key questions in your head, it makes much easier to write, to wrap around what is the main things that this author is trying to say with this article. Because remember, every author, when they write in paper, when they do a research, they're coming from a certain position. So it's good to have an idea what is actually trying to convey to the world. All right, so for week 2 outline, real quick, you can read this in the module guide. Uh, so we need to interrogate the purpose of education, how quality education can be understood or captured. We will discuss the role of quality education in the context of school choice, examine the use of a student and teacher assessment for accountability purposes, and how data is collected and assembled. And then what does it mean for good education management and leadership? Okay, so here are some guiding questions for this week's reading. What is education good for? What are the aims and purpose of education? What is good quality education, and how do we measure education quality? What is good education and how can we measure it? It's quite the same. Can we arrive at a universal definition of quality education? I think this is what we actually really talked in the first week. I remember in the first group we were talking like, how can we have a universal definition if we really want to move away from test scores or rankings and so on. I think this is really, it's where we are at now actually. Can we arrive at a concrete definition? I don't think we can, but that is what this week is trying to interrogate as well. What are your own experiences of quality education, and how do this shape your understanding of what education should be? How can quality education be understood and facilitated through education management and leadership? How does education quality relate to equity and social justice in and through education? And what is the impact of rankings and school inspection regimes on quality and equality? All right, let's go. So this week, we have 3 core readings. Witek and Quernbeck on the problems asking for a definition of quality in education. Biesta's paper, quite recent, the future of education in the Impulse Society, and Tickley and Barrett. This is a much older paper, 2011. Social justice capabilities and the quality education of in low income countries. Um, Sorry for the poor referencing; it's like it's all over the place, but that shouldn't be a problem. All right, let's look at the first one on the problems of asking for a definition of quality in education. Okay, so we'll look into the abstract first, then the theory by Wittgenstein, theory of family resemblance, which the author uses. Then we try to unpack the abstract. I provide some overviews, some key definitions, some key takeaways. Right. So Vitek says, so this is the abstract. Let's move on. So the main research problem is this one. We discussed the problems of asking for a definition in quality education from a philosophy of language perspective. So using philosophy of language perspective as the lens, um, the researchers try to see what is the problem of defining what a quality education really entails. And we take so the method used is, we take the concept of quality as it appears in higher education discourse as our example. We use definition theory and theory pertaining to linguistic vagueness, including Wittgenstein and the idea of family resemblance. So this is the theoretical framework that is being used. I just highlight it as method because methods also include the instruments that you use and also the theory that underpins the research. Of course, you can argue and say, no, that's not the case, but for the ease of our reading, I just did it as such. So, more specifically, we discussed the possibility of obtaining a precise, unified definition of quality by addressing the problem of asking what is questions. So, that is the aim of this paper. The finding is we suggest that quality is an inherently vague concept. You will find this word inherent in most of your reading. It's a very important word. Yep, so keep that in mind. Inherently vague concept which runs us into boundary problems, because if you talk about quality education, it means you're putting a certain boundary, right? Like you're saying this is quality education and then you put a certain boundary. Having good infrastructure, it's it's having good infrastructure, for example, is one of the way to view quality education, right? But that you kind of put a boundary towards what quality education is, and that is really hard because quality education can be actually quite fluid. um, all right, and forces to operate in gray zones. Yeah, if you put this boundary, then you're like in this gray zone, like you really don't know what is quality education in that way, because you put certain boundaries and that may not be true. This means that if your what is question is a question for the essence of quality, you make demands the concept cannot fulfill. Recognition of this fact implies that our expectations concerning concept precision and unity should be modified. Our discussion illuminates, so that's the key conclusion, why it is so difficult to find a definition of the concept of quality. And I think this is an argument you as a leader one day will make, in order for you, when there's a lot of voices in the room asking how do we define quality education. I think this article is a good place to return to. And this theory, Ludwig Wittgenstein's theory of family resemblance, I don't read him a lot in my work, but I think he does. There's a lot of philosophical debates from his work, and I think if you're someone into philosophy, you should check it out. Uh, so, family resemblance refers to the idea that entities in the world, such as concepts, can be structured in overlapping similarity patterns, similar to how the faces of members in a biological family are structured. So, this is a chair. All four items here are chairs, but they all have like footrest. For example, goes here. So, like let's look at this chair, right? So, this is a footrest. This is an armrest. It has a back, and you can sit. And this is a wheelchair, but very like motorized wheelchair, and it also has um, it doesn't have four legs, right? Because it has much more, like I think it has more legs. And this is a, I think, dinner table chair, and it does not have wheels, right? But it has a back and it has four. So you can see here, like this theory of family resemblance really is about um, how that certain concepts can have overlapping similarity patterns, but they could be entirely different. So we're talking about quality education, or let's talk about infrastructure. Say in a school we'll have a science lab, really have all the high-tech devices, and you have another school which is a really basic minimum science lab for their students, but both can be really useful for the students. uh, so yeah, this theory of family resemblance is something that can be used to see how quality education is being defined, and then you go into this whole boundary problem, right? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So there's a sense of vagueness. There's not necessary to look for unity, and I think this is really important. We all look for unity. For example, we look at, there's a standardized goal, and every aspect should achieve to that goal. That might not be the case. Sometimes there's no need for us to look for unity. Blurred boundaries in no way prevent a concept from functioning successfully, like the infrastructure I was talking earlier about, the science labs. um, so that's one thing for you to keep in mind, right? Rather, one might argue that certain degree of fuzziness may be a good thing. So the other idea is fuzziness, all right? Fuzziness. And I think education is now, too much precision might lead to absurdities, and this is so true. because we are now going to this whole, there's a new form of governance taking place in education. It's called precision education governance. There's a few papers out there talking about this concept, and this is very much catalyzed by this whole idea of going for precision, and with this whole AI agenda as well. We really want to like precisely point out how we can teach the students, or how are students learning. So there's a lot of this also very relevant to neuro technology. Um, there's a lot of devices coming out, which is like this whole neurotechnology devices, and there's a whole neuro they call it neuroliberal turn. I think I might have got this wrong. Yeah, but anyway, so there's a whole this whole turn towards this, which this theory of family resemblance can actually use to kind of like argue how we are moving so much into this whole precision education. Um, so unpacking the abstract, I think we have covered this. So some overview of the paper. So the main argument of the paper, defining quality in education, especially in higher education, is inherently problematic due to the term's vagueness, different meanings, and the philosophical mistakes made when demanding a precise or essential definition. Yeah, some key points that you can look into. I'll also provide links to the slide. Um, Another overview is the typology of definitions. The paper explains stipulative, descriptive, and pragmatic definitions, arguing that none can fully capture the complexity of quality as used in educational contexts, and that each approach brings its own issues, particularly regarding boundary cases and practical consequences. The role of family resemblance. Wittgenstein's idea of family resemblance is invoked to explain how quality may encompass a network of overlapping similarities rather than a single set of necessary and sufficient conditions. Of course, then there's also implications for policy and practice. Given the unavoidable vagueness, the authors argue that educational discourse and policy must accept and adapt to living with conceptual gray zones rather than striving for impossible precisions. And I think that's what's happening right now. We are trying to get into this whole precision education governance, and we're trying to like put everything in a box. And I think this really comes from the field of, I think this whole thing is being exported, or yeah, exported to education. It comes from the field of medicine actually. I think someone actually wrote a paper like how the field of medicine um, is like this whole I don't know how to pronounce this word, scientificization. Maybe there's another word for this. I might be wrong, but I can check it out. But this whole scientificization kind of thing, this or you can also say like a fetish towards numbers is really causing this uh, whole precision education kind of logic that is really happening in education now. And we must approach quality as a flexible, context dependent term. All right, let's go to the next slide. So some key concepts for you to work with: vagueness, family resemblance, stipulative, descriptive, and pragmatic. There's different models of quality, and I think this is really important. uh, I think most of you, when you become leaders one day, you will also uh, be coming with this, you will also engage with the whole idea of quality, because people are also going to like employ you because of your background, your experience, or where you did your masters. um, so this whole idea of quality, how is that being um, redefined or reconfigured within your own institution is something that you will also encounter. Boundary or Sorai's problem, the challenge that arises when identifying where quality begins and ends. All right, so you can have a look at this. Some key takeaways. um, you again, I'll give you the slide. I think we can, yeah. So quality has many competing definitions in higher education. The quest for so this is our biggest problem. For an essential one size fits all definition of quality is misguided, because there will be overlapping similarities that exist, but no single trait unifies all users. So that means this whole QS ranking and this whole times ranking, it can be actually very problematic. But rankings, the thing with rankings is like it makes your life easy, because it's very simplified. It is simple and easy to capture, and it's also in a very, it's in a vertical format, right? You look at rankings, it's in vertical. It's very easy to capture this. It's very easy for you as someone who's going through this rankings to just make a decision because it's very simplified. um, so I think this is also something that oops, okay, this is also something for you to like think about. How can we make ranking, how can we um, re-envision how ranking looks like, right? mm, okay, stakeholders from different backgrounds, sorry, this one, attempts to precisely define or measure quality often run into boundary problems and force educators and policymakers to rely on operating in gray zones where criteria are unclear. So the stakeholders also have diverse opinions, sometimes conflicting views, like what we saw in the case study. um, like there was also conflicting views, the teachers, the media, and Sarah Chan's case study. I'm going back to the case study now. So Sarah Chan was doing really well, she increased the grades, the school board loved her, the media loved her, but students maybe didn't like it because they lost all these enrichment programs and so on. So that is something, you'll have conflicting views as well. um, so the paper urges a shift in expectations. uh, Rather seeking for absolute clarity, is more realistic and productive to acknowledge the unavoidable vagueness and context dependency on the concept of quality in education. I think that is so important. We'll now move on to the second article, the future of education, the impulse society, why schools and teachers matter. So this is a very recent article. Uh, so analysis of abstract. So reflections about the future of education often depict the desirable future as one which we need powerful learning environments, and I think this. So Biesta, you have to look into his work. He talks a lot about agency, teacher agency, and structure. And his most recent works always talks about learning environments. And I think if you are someone who's into learning environments or teacher agency, Biesta is the guy for you to read. All right, and he also has this concept called learnification. So that's another concept he uses. But anyway, going back to this, in this paper, I show why such view of future of education is misguided and ultimately uneducational. I make a case for the school as the time we set free from economic and social demands in order to give the new generations a fair chance at arriving in the world by opening new horizons for them. So one of his findings, his teachers in this view are not simply there to facilitate what is already happening, but have the task of giving students more than they may have been able to ask for. Such a future for education relies on understanding that school is not a function or functionary for society, but always needs to stand at critical distance from society. So the way Biesta looks at school is like he distances school from this whole economic and societal demands and the need for schools in a way to operate as a creative place for students to like understand what is happening, and teachers then play a big role in giving this kind of knowledge to students. And I think in the world of AI, if you're looking at it, I think AI will have an impact. Of course, then you're going to ask, you'll be thinking, are you sure? Yeah, will have an impact. We had calculators, we had all kind of technology coming in over the years. Is AI just an hype thing? In a way, yes, AI is super hyped, but I want to also think, I mean, this is not related to the reading, right? But just for you to think, like AI in a way is changing how you, there's this French philosopher, I'll just put this here, he calls it also techniques. I think I don't know how to say his name, Moose. So he actually really talks about the techniques of how we approach the world or how we live our life. Meaning, um, I think there's one very good example is in the past people used to be good at reading maps when they travel, but now we just use Google Maps, Waze, and so on. So cognitively, this has actually really diminished us from like moving around in maps. So the techniques, right, of how we move in the world is changing. And I think it's the same with AI, like the way we, I mean, not for us probably because we are much older and we had time, we had, like from from 0 to 25, we have kind of gone through life without AI. But if you have a child right now who's living in the world of AI, and he's like 14, 15, and he can just use AI so to write his essays, then his whole way of writing essays or his way of thinking, it actually really alters the way you think. So it kind of alters the technique of how you are living your life. um, right, so Biesta actually just does this, right? Biesta talks about it's important for schools to be more than just being this place where it reproduces humans for the economic and societal demands. um, so he critically examines the current trends and proposed futures in education, arguing against the increasing shift towards learnification and the reduction of schooling in to personalized and flexible learning environments. So again, he makes some really good arguments here. You can look into the paper, but some key definitions is learnification, the trend of equating education with learning. So everything becomes learning in school. Um, so the focus is primarily then is on acquiring knowledge, skills, and personal trajectories, often sidelining the broader purpose of education and diminishing the teacher's role. We also live in an impulse society. That's another thing that Biesta says. Um, a society driven by instant gratification, and like this is no, like what it does is like it exerts pressure on education to simply serve the market or societal needs rather than fostering critical and independent individuals. The role of schools are envisioned as spaces of free time away from direct economic and societal demands, uh, essentially for genuine educational experience that involve more than just practical skills and acquisition. um, then there's the teacher significance, also educational emancipation, whereby schools should really be about a mature engagement with the world, not just adaptation or skill acquisition. And I think the most important thing for me as a teacher as well, teaching as pointing, and I think this is really important. Teaching is actually conceptualized as the art of drawing students' attention to the world and to themselves, making possible encounters that students cannot achieve alone. And I think that is what most teachers are doing, right? It's the art of pointing. Like you point a student to a certain direction, and then they get on and they go with it. Uh, some key takeaways. So the vision of the future, wholly focused on flexible, personalized, job and oriented learning environment, is ultimately uneducational. So Biesta argues like this whole personalization is uneducational and risks surrendering the unique value of education. And I think you guys, this is really important because this whole personalization agenda, this whole future oriented and so on, um, it kind of, what Biesta argues is, education has a unique value of emancipation, and that is being so unfulfilled right now because of the society and economic structures we are in. Now this is something you can be critical about, because ultimately we all live in this whole economic structure. We all live in this, you can also argue we live in this capitalistic society. We can't go away from that. We can't move away from that. So then what is education, right? How would you redefine education? So I think it really comes down to your own context as well. Like Biesta can make these arguments, but is that necessarily the case? If you're dealing with students who are playing truant, who have no motivation to learn, maybe some kind of personalization would help them. Maybe this whole unique value of education does not mean much for them, but they do need education for them to succeed in the economy. So again, I think that is something for us to be critical about, not just accept and think that this is all great. Yeah, it looks great on the paper, but what it really is in reality is something completely different. But then is that's an argument for all of us to think about. So Biesta says the true value of schooling lies in setting aside time and space free from economic and social imperatives, so allowing new generation to engage with the world inquisitively and critically. Again, if you are basic, I think there is this Maslow hierarchy, right? So if your basic needs is not fulfilled, then it's very hard for you to critically engage with the world and be inquisitive about it. So what is the role of education in your society? I think this is something that uh, we all can think, right? Ultimately, of course, these are all really idealistic thinking, right? We want our students to, or we want the new generation to engage with the world in a more critical way. But can they, if even their basic needs are not being taken care of, right? Teachers are, so the next one is teachers are essential and not accidental to education. Their role is to bring students to meaningful encounters with knowledge, the world, and themselves. All right, we'll go to another paper. Just one quick one from Biester. He advocates for a world centered on education, a world centered education where the ultimate goal is meaningful engagement in the world, rooted in freedom, and which education can truly offer. The third paper is a paper written much later, sorry, early, like 2011, which was like 14 years ago, from Leon Tickley and Angela Barrett. They are both based in University of Bristol, and this is like a very key paper on social justice and capabilities and the quality of education in low income countries. So this is a really important paper. If you're talking about social justice, you have to read this and you have to cite it. So we'll go really quickly to the. So this is a very long abstract, but we'll go into it. Um, so this paper sets out a theoretical approach for understanding the quality of education in low-income countries from a social justice perspective. So there's two dominant approaches. The first one is the human capital approach, and the second one is the human rights approach. Drawing principally on the ideas of Nancy Fraser and Amartya Sen, the paper sets out an alternative approach based on the theory of social justice and capability. The paper develops an overall understanding of how education quality can be understood in relation to the extent to which it fosters key capabilities that individuals, community, and society in general have reason to value. So, one of the key findings is there's like three interrelated dimensions of quality of education from a social justice perspective. So, the first one is inclusion, the second one is relevance, and the third dimension, I think, is democracy. So these are the key three dimensions that bring together um, education from a social justice lens, and how quality education then can be redefined, you can say, or reconfigured. Um, so I'll just move on to the next slide. So basically, yeah, so basically it says that a social justice framework can provide alternative rationale for a policy emphasis on quality that encompasses but goes beyond that provided by human capital and rights approach, so that through emphasizing the importance of context and through providing a normative basis for thinking about quality in relation to development, it provides a useful, so the framework that Tickley and Angela Barrett do is useful. It's a useful starting point for reconceptualizing education quality and how it can be evaluated. uh, so here's the overview of this paper. So this slide, you can look into it later. And these are some key concepts from the paper. So there's the human capital and inequality, capital and the capabilities of perspective. So this is a whole new body of work from a capabilities perspective, which we outline below. So this is extremely important if you're talking about the capabilities in social justice. And again, more here and some key takeaways from the paper. So the current approaches in education provides important insights but are insufficient for addressing all aspects of education quality in low income and African contexts. So a social justice perspective broadens the rationale for focusing on quality, emphasizing basic freedoms and the broader role of education in development. So effective policy requires attention to context, inclusive participation, the recognition and empowerment of disadvantaged groups. So this is really important. I think we all talk about it. The quality of education should not just be measured by test scores or years of schooling, but by, okay, this is really important, but by the capabilities it helps learners and communities develop, including autonomy, critical thinking, health, social relations, and meaningful participation. And I think this was really important in our discussion last week from the second group, the evening group. There was this whole idea of cultural capital, and how that is really hard to measure compared to test scores. And I think it really comes down to that. Like if we have a different framework looking at defining what quality education is, maybe we can make sense of how education can be measured. But of course, like I said, the rankings, vertical based rankings, test scores, numbers, quantifications, these are much easier, and I can't find a better word, but people always call it like it's a more sexy way to measure and also rank these institutions, and in that way that then shows quality. uh, but it really does a disservice to what education is, like what Bierstadt argued, like education is much more than all of this, and we should move away from this whole economic and social imperatives. But it's really hard. But I think what Leon Ticklis and Angela Barrett's argument says here is, so the authors actually stress the need for ongoing dialogue about the nature of education quality, and caution that a social justice approach is not a fixed blueprint but a guide for critical engagement and multiple policy levels. um, so yeah, so these three readings, they actually kind of speak together. The first reading kind of says, look, you cannot, like from Vitek and Quenback, right? They talk about the family resemblance. They say how education quality is, it's sometimes it's this overlapping traits, this overlapping features, and but having a standardization might be a disservice because it might not be a good thing. And then Biesa then argues that the current way we look at education is uneducational. So he uses this term called uneducational, and I find that really interesting. But for someone who, like me, who has been a teacher for like 9 to 10 years in the classroom with failing students, um, you know I need to improve their test scores in some ways, because it's only then they can get access to higher education. And from the third article, from Leon Tickley and Barrett, they talk about really having a social justice framework in defining education, and they use these three dimensions. What was it again? I think it was inclusion. I think it's here. Yeah, inclusion, relevance, and like in a way democracy, uh in like really defining the quality of education. So this has been a pretty long video. I like to end now, and I hope this is helpful for your reading. Thank you very much.